Today I'm continuing with my blender batter series, and I'm going to show you how to make a whole grain bread using the actual wheat berries, and no grain mill required, just a simple blender. Hi sweet friends, my name is Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest. This channel is all about living the simple life by cooking from scratch, making home remedies, and creating a cozy home with thrift store finds. So if you're like me and you like the simple life, subscribe to my channel and be sure to click on the little notification bell that'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now what I've got here that I'm going to be using today are white wheat berries. You can also use red wheat berries or spelt berries, any type of whole grain that you want. Now these wheat berries are sprouted. Now you don't need to use sprouted wheat berries. You can just use plain wheat berries that you buy at the store. However, if you want to sprout them, I've got a video in the past where I show how to do that, and it walks you through step by step, no special equipment required. So you can certainly sprout them before you do this if you want to. Now what I've got here are 1.5 cups of the white wheat berries. And what's nice about these blender batter recipes is you don't need a grain mill and you can still make whole grain breads using whole grains. So we're going to just go ahead and put that right into the blender. And then the next thing we're going to do is cover these with water. And what we want to get to is we don't want to have too much water. We just want to have enough where they're soaked and then slightly covered. Let's see, yeah, it's about 1/2 inch, and that's perfect. So I just put the lid on the blender, and the next thing we're going to do is get ready to blend this. And we're going to do it exactly like we did with my previous blender batter recipe where we made the pancake batter. We want to make sure that we get a vortex going in the blender, and I'll bring you in closer so you can see that exactly what we're looking for. So we may have to add a little extra water, but we're just going to watch it and we're going to see if we get that vortex going. So it's a little noisy, but I think you can see the vortex going on in the blender. That's exactly what you want to look for. So I'm going to gently remove this lid so I can show you the vortex that you're looking for. That's exactly what you're looking for. And that's that. It's all ground up for us. Now, I just want to mention, when I first got it going and I was watching the vortex form, I felt it needed just a smidge more water. So I added maybe 1/8 to 1/4 cup. And you'll know when you do this because as you see the vortex forming, if it's struggling at all, whatnot, just add a little more water and then it'll really take off and you'll see that vortex forming like I showed you. Alrighty, now the next thing we do is we take our batter. We're going to get ready to make our bread. And as you see, it's just kind of like it comes out like a thick pancake batter or porridge almost. Alrighty, now the next thing that we're going to do, let me just put this aside, is add 2 teaspoons of salt. And this is a sea salt that I'm using, a fine ground sea salt. And then the next thing I want to do is add a tablespoon of molasses. Now I've greased the inside of my spoon a little, so hopefully it won't stick too much. But we're just going to put about a tablespoon of this. Now, if you want, you can use honey or any other kind of, some people like to use brown rice syrup or sorghum syrup, so on and so forth. But I like to use molasses because it's just so rich in nutrients. And it also gives a nice little flavor to the bread. It did pretty good. I greased it with a little olive oil. Alrighty. Now, at this point, you have a couple of options. Now, if you want to make a sourdough version of this, this is the time when you'll add your sourdough starter. Now, if you don't have sourdough starter or you simply don't want to make this a sourdough bread, the next step that you'll want to do is get some yeast. You can get the little package, from the grocery store and put it in a little bit of water, just following the instructions, and then adding that to this mixture. So I'm just going to give this a stir and just to incorporate the salt and the molasses, and then I'm going to get ready to add my sourdough starter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my sourdough starter and I'm just going to put in 1/2 cup, and that's it. And now I'm just going to mix in my sourdough starter. So I mixed in my sourdough starter, and now we're ready to go on to adding our flour. And this is where you've got a couple of options. you can, if you've gone with the sourdough starter, you can add bread flour or all-purpose flour, whatever you can find at your grocery store, because you've got the goodness of the sourdough going on and the whole grains that we ground up in the beginning in the blender. If you're going with yeast, you may want to just keep it all whole grain. So at this point, you can add your whole wheat flour or your spelt flour, whatever type of flour that you want to use that you have on hand or that you can easily find at your grocery store. Now, what I'm using is sprouted whole white wheat flour. This again, you know, don't worry about it. You know, I like to sprout my grains and then grind them and make my own flour. And I think I linked to the video before where I show how to do that. But you can use any flour that you want at this point. You can use flours that are sprouted or flours that are not sprouted. It doesn't matter. White whole wheat is nice because it tends to make a little bit of a lighter loaf. And if you can find it at your grocery store, that's great. I think King Arthur has that brand, and I sometimes see it at my grocery store, the white whole wheat, and I always see it at Whole Foods. But the one thing I wanted to mention is that everything I did use was organic, because I like to avoid the pesticides that are sprayed on wheat. Now what I've got here are about 4 cups of flour, and I'm going to just start adding a cup at a time and mixing it in into our batter here until I get a nice sort of, you want it to be kind of a wet dough, but I'll show you as we go along and we add the flour in the consistency that you're looking for. Now I'm adding in my 2nd cup of flour. So this is how the mixture is looking right now, and now I'm going to get ready to add in my 3rd cup of flour. Now this batter is really starting to come along nicely, and I think I'm going to add, at this point I'm going to add just half a cup, and we'll see how it looks after that. Well, I think 3½ cups of flour did the trick, because this is what you want the dough to look like. It's kind of a wet, kind of a shaggy, as they say, looking dough. And I've switched from my spatula to this whisk. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these or worked with one of these. I think they call it a Danish dough whisk. And I'll put a link in the description below where you can find one. I love this. It is so easy when you're mixing a dough like this and you're incorporating the flour to mix everything in beautifully. It's amazing how just a simple little thing like this, but it does a good job in any event. So this is how you want the dough to look. I just want to show you again. See, kind of like that. Nice, and see, it's pretty wet. Now, the next thing, I've got my bread loaf pan here. We're going to make this into a loaf. Certainly you can do boules and so on and so forth, but I thought this is the easiest to show to get you started, especially if you're new to baking bread. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take this and I'm going to transfer it into my loaf pan. Well, I've got my hands floured, and now I'm going to go in and just pull all this out of the bowl and, whoops, sorry, and transfer it right into the loaf pan. Now I just wanted to show you my hands after handling the dough, how wet and sticky they are. So that'll give you an idea of what your dough should be like, and you'll know you're doing the right thing. Now, if you used yeast, you'll just want to set this aside in a warm place and let it rise till it gets a nice rounded crown to it, and then you'll be ready to bake it. Now, since I use my sourdough starter, I'm going to let this sit overnight. I'm going to let it sit for about 12 hours. You can let it sit as little as 6 hours, but I'm going to let this sit 12 hours, and then I'm going to bake it. And right before we get ready to bake it, we're going to want to set our oven, regardless of whether you use sourdough or yeast, we're going to want to set our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, let it preheat, and then we're going to put this loaf into the oven, and it should bake up in about 45 minutes. If you notice that it's browning too quickly, then you can put, after about 20 minutes, you can put a little aluminum foil over the top, and that'll help the top not become too brown. But it should be okay. So it's going to be 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes. Well, I let my dough rise overnight. It was about 12 hours, and I just kept it in a warm place, and I covered it with this towel. And then I also had a little piece of plastic wrap that I had coated with a little olive oil so it wouldn't stick. And as you can see, my sourdough starter really was lively. But I wanted to mention that when I mixed it in the bowl, I put it right into the loaf pan because it's no knead. You don't need to worry about that, and it makes it a lot easier, which is nice. And that's why we wanted kind of a wet, shaggy dough, because that's best for your no knead recipes. And you might have seen I was using the Danish dough hook at the end, but I just used that to mix it. I didn't really spend any time kneading it or worrying about that. I just used it to mix it up. So now what we're going to do is put this into a 350-degree oven, and I'm going to check it at 25 minutes. If it's done, great, I'll take it out. If it needs to go a little longer, I'll let you know. If it's browning too much on top, I might just tent it with a little aluminum foil and let it go a few more minutes. But this is just ready to go in, so I'm going to go put this in the oven now. Well, I took my bread out of the oven a little while ago, let it cool, and sliced it up. So it took about 45 minutes. But it's just beautiful, and the molasses and the sourdough starter give it a wonderful flavor. Almost reminds me of like a hearty German bread. If you'd like more blender batter recipes, be sure to subscribe to my channel and then click on this video over here where I show how to make blender batter pancakes with whole grains. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless. Mmm. Mmm.